Is the government shutdown worth it? That's a question a lot of people are asking now, 23 days into this shutdown with no end in sight, air traffic controllers and more than 1 million other federal workers not getting paid, and the Trump administration happily taking advantage of this shutdown to slash programs supported by Democrats. So is it worth it? Well, today we talk to Senator Ruben Gallego of Arizona. He's a rising star in the Democratic Party. He won his seat in Arizona last year as Vice President Kamala Harris lost the presidential election. He's seen as a Democrat who gets it, gets the concerns of ordinary middle class, working class voters the Democrats have been losing in droves. Senator Gallego thinks that fighting President Trump and the Republicans on this issue is the right thing to do. Do you agree? I also talked with Senator Gallego on Trump's immigration crackdown in Chicago, his hometown and mine. He's a combat veteran. He understands urban warfare, and he is worried about what happens when Trump sends troops into the streets of Chicago, if the Supreme Court lets him do that. He's already done it in other cities. The senator's worried about the possibility of blood being spilled for no good reason. Senator Gallego is a real patriot and a straight shooter, as you'll see, and I think you'll like this interview. If you do, well, give us a like and subscribe to the channel. We aim to bring you in-depth interviews with major newsmakers as well as on-the-ground reporting on some of the big stories out there. I spent the past few days in Chicago. Our report on that will be up next Tuesday. Hope you watch. So right now, Senator Ruben Gallego. Senator Ruben Gallego, thank you very much for being with us. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I want to ask you if it's day 23 of the shutdown of the federal government. And I live out in Frederick, Maryland, and a lot of my neighbors are feeling it. They're posting their paychecks with $0 in them, air traffic controllers, other things. And I saw a report at a DC food bank, Senate staffers and other federal workers showing up at a food bank because they need to eat. I mean, this is really beginning to have terrible real-world consequences for people in the federal government and beyond. What do you say to people who say, why are we doing this?
Well, we're doing this because there's also going to be long-term consequences. Our federal workers are all going to get paid. We're going to make sure they get their back pay. Matter of fact, I signed even on to a bill today that would actually make sure they are getting paid even during a shutdown. We'll see the Republicans actually allow that bill to come to the floor. I sincerely doubt they will. But that is short-term pain. Long-term pain is going to be starting November 1st, when Americans, 24 million Americans, 24 million families are going to have to look at their insurance plans for next year. And most of them are going to have to pay double their premiums they have in the past for them to get the insurance that they need. And in Arizona, for example, a family of four, it's going to be an extra $3,400, $3,300 a year. I know of one family where he has a son that is unfortunately needs a lot of medical attention. He already pays $3,000 a month. This will probably jump, his monthly premium to probably like, $6,000 a month altogether. And when that happens, it's not for short term. It's not for a short term, month when the government's closed. It's for a whole year. And potentially, if we don't get this right, you're going to permanently raise the premiums on Americans. Right now, when things are so expensive, it's so expensive to do everything. The Republican Party has the option to keep at least insurance premiums level at where they are, and instead they're willing to take a gamble and the risk of that, and we're not willing to just let that go quietly.
And so that's a winning issue for Democrats, obviously. And I have heard Republicans kind of
The winning issues for America. I mean, don't we want America? We complain about the cost of everything. Don't we want Americans to have affordable health insurance? This is a clear, easy answer to make sure they do, at least for a short-term period.
I heard one of the members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, kind of taunting the Democrat side because they managed to make the Trump tax cuts permanent. And they said, well, it's the Democrats' own fault that they weren't able to make the Affordable Care Act subsidies that help people pay for health insurance. That it's your fault that these things aren't permanent.
Well, look, when we did a lot of the negotiations when it comes to this types of subsidies, it was around COVID. And we were trying to basically make sure that we had bipartisan support because COVID was hard for everybody. We knew that For example, businesses were going under, so we wanted to make sure that businesses were able to be supported. We injected money directly into people's pocketbooks so they could actually pay and afford to stay home instead of spreading COVID. And part of that was also make sure that we, went back and subsidized our healthcare markets. And of course, we would love to have done this permanently, but we did this in a bipartisan manner because we do things for the sake of this country versus the Republicans, like you're talking about, they're taunting. You're not taunting me. You're not taunting Democrats. You're taunting Americans. You're taunting Americans that are about to see their healthcare premiums double. And if they want to take that chance right now, with the cost of energy so high, the cost of food so high, and now they're willingly going to increase the premiums on 48 million Americans at a minimum, go ahead, take your chance. But what I'm trying to tell you, it's not worth it. I don't want to take political chances with people's livelihood. There's estimated that 4 million people will just not have health insurance rather than pay the increase. I don't want to mess with that, even though, yes, politically that would be beneficial to us. I want Americans to have security. I want Americans to be able to have a security knowing they have affordable health care. Republicans right now are basically going to destroy that. And all they have to do is sit down and negotiate with us. We're willing to talk. We're willing to come to a compromise. But we want to make sure 24 million Americans do not have their insurance premiums doubled starting November 1st. It's very simple. It's a very simple solution. They should be looking out for their own self that they would want to make sure that doesn't happen.
Are they getting the message? It feels like this shutdown has gone from a very dramatic, almost crisis in the country to kind of a story that has faded. And I wonder if the leverage that is usually, what people are seeking when one party or the other allows the government to shut down, what if that's working? Do you think it's working?
It's hard to tell. I think for me, this is not like, is it working versus not working? Are we winning versus not winning? That's just not the way I want to think about this. I want to think about this. How can I make sure that 24 million Americans have affordable health insurance? I think that any elected official, Democrat, Republican, or Independent, I think deep down in their core, they want to make sure that they're not screwing over, their constituents. And maybe they're not hearing it right now because I think people are busy. Very few places have started sending out their notices about how much premiums are going to rise. But November 1st, no matter where you are, no matter where you are in this country, that's when people start looking at their insurance and re-enrollment, and there's going to be sticker shock. And I think that sticker shock is going to end up having a big political fallout, which at the end will benefit the American voter, because hopefully that will push my colleagues to get together, let's get a compromise together, and make sure that 24 million Americans have affordable health insurance.
Looking forward to that moment. Not the sticker shock, but the fact that it might
Right.
actually resolve this. Let me shift gears a little bit. I've just spent a few days in my hometown and yours as well, the city of Chicago, the great city of Chicago. And I was there to see, now that kind of the blaring headlines have faded, what it's like for people living there and how they're responding. And I must say, I found it very impressive. It seems like Chicago is standing up in ways that are practical and effective and enduring. Neighborhoods surrounding the neighbors who are vulnerable to what's going on there. And yet the Supreme Court has before it right now the case where they may allow federal troops, military troops on the streets of that city. How do you read what's going on in the city of your birth as well?
Well, look, I have a lot of family there. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I still have family that are actually on the south side of Chicago. As you know, I'm Latino. I'm half Colombian, half Mexican. I have, godsons and daughters and goddaughters and nieces and nephews. Some of them that take public transportation that they're afraid. Their parents are afraid. They're afraid of being racially profiled. And this Supreme Court has allowed racial profiling to happen in the city that has a rich history with Latino culture. Why are you pulling in the National Guard? That's what I'd like to know, right? This isn't an effort in trying to bring safety. If you want to bring safety and you want to have more safe streets, then hire more cops and help the state of Illinois and Chicago hire more cops. That's not what's happening here. They're going to bring a bunch of National Guardsmen, put them on active duty, and put them in some very high-profile areas like downtown Chicago where the crime doesn't exist, just to show that you can do it, right? It's not really to actually bring any type of security, and it's just anti-American to see our U.S. military on the streets of the United States. It has an ick factor. It's okay for us to say that. But I think there's a lot of reasons why people are against this. Can we have some logical arguments about bringing down crime? Sure. I think we should always be trying to bring down crime. It benefits, everybody. Certainly, for the poor communities that I grew up in, you don't want crime. Crime is a tax on the poor, but these communities also do not want a heavy-handed government there. And certainly, especially when they're really not going to do anything, they're just going to sit around and look tough. But at the end, they're not going to bring security to these communities, and you're only going to create this animosity, which this administration wants to create. They want to create this animosity where there's, soldiers fighting, locals, so that he could, create a better excuse to order the Insurrection Act to come true.
Well, that's the next question. So if it's a show, if it doesn't really have the practical effect of bringing down crime, which is not a federal responsibility, right? That is explicitly reserved to the states. For in most instances, the police power under the
Sure.
Constitution, the 10th Amendment. So here,
Look, and Terry, let's go back. Like, there are some things that they could do. For example, Chicago has a lot of gun violence. Most of those guns do not come from Illinois. Maybe this president should work with the ATF and the FBI to figure out how these guns are being brought and sold to all these criminals in Illinois. But of course, they don't want to do that because that goes against their base. If these criminals, these gang members, all these criminals in Illinois didn't have access to weapons, there'd be a lot less crime. That's an effective place where the federal government should be doing. Are they doing that? Absolutely not. Right? Are they
yeah.
dealing with some of the other issues that come around in terms of drug trafficking? Nope. All they want to do is show that they have power, and they're putting these guys in helmets on the streets that it really aren't going to make that big of a difference.
So let me ask you a bigger question. We reach in time, I think, and that's this: the troops on the streets here in Washington, L.A., perhaps soon to be in Chicago. The way President Trump speaks about people who oppose him, all the rest of what people fear is a creeping authoritarianism that is built in many ways on targeting people like you, right? I mean,
Sure.
let's face it. That's they use. We see the videos, people, American citizens getting snatched because, of who they are, what they look like, how they sound.
Yeah.
Does that make you feel angry or less patriotic? Maybe are you disappointed in this
No, I
country?
mean, you could have, as a Marine, as a combat Marine, I can never feel less patriotic towards my country. I'm disappointed that they're using the military in this way. And also I'm worried because you're actually going to end up deteriorating the military. You're going to make it more political and less apolitical. And I think, one of the last institutions in this country that people trust is the military because it's largely been apolitical. Two, I'm worried what's going to happen. I don't worry that the military is going to be able to take over the streets. Only an idiot like Donald Trump, who's never served and certainly has never served urban combat, thinks that like 500 National Guardsmen are going to be able to take a city of 2.7 million people, population-wise, and even more. As people come in, right? It's dumb, it's idiotic, it's stupid. There's no way to do that. But what happens when you trigger something? When you have such high tension, you have young men and women, and I serve with very young men and women in combat, in urban combat. What happens when you have some very young men in the National Guard and they get ordered to do something? You don't know if they're going to say yes or no, and you don't know what the response from the civilian world is going to be in reaction. And all you're doing is creating unnecessary tension. You're creating this negative relationship between our civilian and our military.
Yes.
You're creating an environment where people start looking at the federal government as their enemy, and it's something that deteriorates trust among all of us. And to add to that, they're bringing in guardsmen from Texas to Illinois. Like, why are you doing cross border nationalization of our military? You're essentially trying to set up a red state versus blue state scenario, which can really unravel very fast.
And
Real leaders,
sorry.
real leaders, not leaders that only care about themselves, would never do something like that. But he's a petty man. And he needs and uses the military to make himself feel better because he is deeply, deeply scarred and emotionally disturbed from something that someone did to him or said to him many years ago.
And it sounds, last question, it sounds as if you're concerned about blood being spilled in Chicago or somewhere over all of this.
Well, I'm concerned about blood being spilled anywhere. Why is that? Look, whenever you have military or you have any type of military forces and you have civilians, and if they act out of norm, the civilian population will push back. That is the nature of humanity. It's always been that case. If you look at the history of the world and you see what has happened in the past, whenever someone acts above their authority, they break that social contract with citizens, things can go bad, and they don't have to. That's the thing that really gets me mad, is that we're not pushing this because there's a problem that needs to be solved. That we're pushing this because there's a problem that needs to be created, and the president wants to use our U.S. military and the reaction from the civilian to create that problem.
All right. Well, Senator Ruben Gallego, thank you very much for being with us. Really appreciate it. Great conversation.
Thank you. Have a good one.